Only I came to my husband's funeral. Not our son. Not our daughter. Not a single grandchild. Just me, standing beside his coffin while the cold wind tore through the chapel courtyard. As if even the weather couldn't bear to stay. The funeral director looked uneasy, his eyes flicking between the empty rows of seats and my face. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes, Mrs. Holloway?" "No," I said. "Start." George would have hated a delay. He was punctual even in his final days, taking his pills by the clock, watching the evening news at 6 sharp, folding his slippers neatly side by side before bed. A man of habit. A man of dignity. And now, a man laid to rest alone. I sat in the front row. 5 empty chairs surrounded me like accusations. The pastor recited scripture without conviction. The flowers were too bright. The casket too polished. I couldn't stop thinking how George would have laughed at the fuss, and then frowned, scanning the room, asking where the hell the kids were. Where were they? A message had come that morning. Our son Peter sent a single line. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Can't make it." No explanation. No call. I imagined him at his office, or more likely on a golf course with clients, pretending not to feel the weight of the day, pretending his father's death was just another small inconvenience in an already crowded calendar. Our daughter Celia hadn't messaged at all. She'd left a voicemail 2 days earlier, her voice breezy as a spring wind. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment, and you know how anxious I get with reschedules. Tell Dad I'll visit him next week." Next week. As if dead men wait. After the service, I walked alone behind the pallbearers. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't grieving. I had been grieving for months. But there is a kind of sorrow so deep it becomes still, settling inside you like an anchor. And that day I was already buried beneath it. The cemetery was nearly deserted. An old groundskeeper watched from a distance, one hand resting on his spade. The coffin was lowered. Prayers were murmured. Dust met wood. Wood met silence. I stayed long after the others left. My heels sank slightly into the earth as the wind tugged at my coat. The headstone would come later. For now there was only a simple plaque bearing his name. George Holloway. Beloved husband. Father. Forgotten. The word lodged itself in my mind like a stone in a shoe. Back home the quiet roared. His recliner sat untouched. His slippers were still aligned beside the bed. The TV remote lay exactly where he'd left it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, a good one saved for guests, and poured myself a glass. I took out my phone and opened Instagram. I rarely scroll, but something told me to look. Celia's profile was public, of course. She had posted 2 hours earlier. A photo of herself and 3 girlfriends, drinks raised mid-laughter. Girls' brunch. Bottomless mimosas. Living our best lives. Peter had posted too. A snapshot of the 9th hole. His new driver gleaming in the sun. Killer swing. Perfect weather. Deals made. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I turned off the phone, took another sip of wine, and looked at the photograph on the wall. George and me on our 40th anniversary, standing beside the rose bushes he'd planted with his own hands. They used to bloom red. Now they were bare. Tomorrow I thought I'll call the lawyer. I would make changes quietly, with the same dignity George had lived with, because if I was the only one who showed up for his final goodbye, then I would be the only one to carry out his final will, and theirs. That evening I sat alone in our kitchen, the same room where George used to peel apples with the precision of a surgeon, slicing them into neat crescents and lining them on a plate. He always offered me the best piece. The one with the most sunshine, he said. Now the fruit bowl sat untouched. A couple of overripe pears sagged under their own skin. The silence wasn't unfamiliar. George had been gone nearly 2 weeks before the funeral, and those days had already begun teaching me the shape of solitude. But tonight it pressed harder, louder, crueler. I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chairs. About Celia's message, or rather the absence of one. Had I raised a daughter who could watch her father be lowered into the ground from the comfort of a brunch table? Had I failed her? Or had she failed something inside herself that could no longer be recovered? Peter's text was still there. No punctuation. No warmth. Just a flat rejection in black and white. Something came up. Was it shame? Indifference? Or the kind of casual cruelty you don't even recognize until it's too late? I poured another glass of wine. Not out of sorrow, but out of clarity. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom and opened the top drawer of George's desk. His things were exactly as he'd left them. Envelopes, spare keys, and old stamp book. Behind the files, I pulled out the folder I kept hidden. Thin. Neat. Secured with a rubber band. Estate. Inside were copies of our will, a list of beneficiaries, instructions for the house, the car, the accounts, even the antique clock George's grandfather had brought from Dublin. Everything prepared and reviewed by our lawyer 2 years earlier, with love and foresight. I sat on the edge of the bed and read. Peter was listed as co-beneficiary of the main investment account. Nearly $300,000, accumulated through decades of work and restraint. He and Celia were both named in the house transfer clause. Even the lake cabin, the one they never visited anymore but always asked about when taxes came due, was earmarked for them. My fingers trembled. Not from age. From betrayal. Betrayal has a pulse, and mine thudded in my ears. I rose and pulled a canvas storage bin from the closet. Inside were the photographs. Reunions, birthdays, holidays. George holding the children when they were small. Me laughing on the porch. Celia tugging at my sleeve. Peter asleep in George's lap. A book fallen open across his chest. We had been a family. Maybe I had been naive to miss how far we'd drifted. Maybe love doesn't erode in a storm. Maybe it fades like wallpaper in the sun, quietly, until one day you no longer recognize the pattern. I picked up a photo of George and Peter fishing. Peter couldn't have been more than 12. George's arm rested around his shoulders, pointing toward the water, his smile soft and full. That man deserved more than an empty chapel. I set the photo down. Then I picked up the phone. It was nearly midnight. I didn't care. I called Thomas Fields, our lawyer. It went to voicemail as expected. "Thomas, it's May Holloway," I said. "I need to revise my will, urgently. Call me in the morning." I ended the call and stood by the window. Moonlight brushed the tops of the rose bushes outside. They had withered since George passed. Not from neglect, but as if in sympathy. They would need pruning. Space to bloom again. But not tonight. Tonight I let the old petals fall. Tomorrow I would begin cutting away what no longer belonged. They were busy. I placed my hands flat on the table, calm as still water. "They don't deserve a dime." Thomas gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "Then we'll draft a full amendment. You want them removed from every provision?" "Yes. The accounts, the house, the cabin. Everything." "Understood." He opened a legal pad and began writing in neat, deliberate lines. "Would you like to redirect the assets to someone else?" I thought of Ethan, my grandson, Celia's boy. The only one who ever came by without needing something. The one who mowed my lawn in July not because I asked, but because he said I shouldn't be sweating out there. The one who brought library books and wanted my opinion on them. The one who once said, "Grandma, I like talking to you more than kids my age." I took a breath. Yes. I'd like to set up a trust for Ethan. I want him to have the house, the cabin, and the remainder of the estate. I want it structured carefully, protected from his parents' reach. "That can be arranged," Thomas said. His tone dry and professional in a way I appreciated. "We'll create an irrevocable trust in Ethan's name. He won't have full access until he's 30, except for education or medical expenses. Does that sound acceptable?" "It sounds perfect." We spent the next hour reviewing details, paper after paper, clause after clause. I didn't flinch. When you've buried your husband with your own hands and stood beside an open grave without a child in sight, a stack of legal documents doesn't scare you. After that, nothing trivial can reach you. As we neared the end, Thomas looked up again. "May I say, this isn't something many people your age do so cleanly. Most want to forgive. To keep the peace. I've kept the peace for 80 years, I said quietly. And it buried me long before it buried George." He didn't ask another question. When I stepped out of the office, the sun was just beginning to stretch across the sidewalk. I paused, letting the October air hit my face. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry anymore either. I was simply done. Done waiting for my children to become people they never intended to be. Done mistaking duty for love. Done writing checks with my heart and expecting anything in return but silence. My footsteps echoed as I walked to my car. The leather seat felt warmer than usual. I sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, watching people move along the street. A woman passed with her daughter, fingers intertwined, sharing a laugh. I didn't envy them. I simply noted the scene like an old song I once loved but no longer played. That night, I slept without the television on, without a book, without George's old sweater folded beside me the way it had been since the hospital. The silence was still there, but it didn't hurt. Not anymore. The file cabinet in the hallway had 3 drawers, each labeled in George's steady block print: house, taxes, family. The last one was mine. I opened it slowly. The metal groaned, reluctant, as if it knew what ghosts it held. Inside were folders upon folders, receipts, canceled checks, bank letters, Christmas cards tucked between loan agreements. I hadn't kept them out of obsession. I believed in clarity. Paper doesn't lie, and that drawer held enough truth to light a forest fire. I sat at the kitchen table and placed the folder labeled Peter, education and business, to one side. Then I opened Celia, home and lifestyle. The handwriting was mine. Neater in the early years, still legible now. A $15,000 check. 2003, Celia's wedding. It's a small ceremony, Mom. We just want a nice venue. That venue had chandeliers, lobster rolls, and a string quartet. $7,800 transfer. 2007. The roof's leaking, Mom. The baby's crib got soaked. I paid it within the hour. $12,000 in 2011. New braces for Ethan. $5,000 in 2013. Summer robotics camp. It's a big deal, Mom. Then came the year her husband was laid off. I sent another $20,000 without a single question. You always save us, she whispered. Over the phone. We don't know what we'd do without you. I believed her. Peter's folder was thicker. $25,000 in seed money for a sure thing startup that folded in 6 months. George warned me not to send it. I sent it anyway. A used car. A down payment. 3 semesters of grad school. Hospital bills when his second daughter was born. Insurance when the first broke her arm. When Peter fell behind on taxes, I wrote the check and told no one. Line after line, I wondered when I'd become their safety net. Or maybe I always had been, and I was simply too willing to let them fall into me. Not once did they ever refuse my help. But they had refused to come say goodbye to their father. And that was something paper could never fix. I returned every file to the cabinet except one. The envelope marked Ethan. Inside was a note he'd written at 11. Folded pencil lines, uneven letters. Grandma May, thank you for teaching me how to make pancakes. I think you are very wise and funny. One day I will take care of you like you take care of me. I held it for a long time. He was 19 now. I didn't know if he remembered writing it, or if it still meant anything to him. But it meant everything to me. I had meant to be fair. To divide things equally. That's what people say, isn't it? Be fair. Don't play favorites. But what if fairness wasn't sameness? What if fairness meant giving your legacy to the one person who saw you, not as a bank but as a human being? George used to say, legacy isn't what you leave. It's who you leave it to. I used to think he meant money. Now I knew better. The house felt smaller that day, not because it had changed, but because I was finally seeing it without the weight of memory. 4 years I'd kept every trinket the children ever gave me. Handmade cards, macaroni frames, glittery mugs. But love isn't in objects. It's in action. And their actions had all said the same thing. You're useful. Not valuable. That afternoon I packed 3 cardboard boxes with their old gifts. Not to throw away. Not yet. Just to make space. Space for something else to grow. That night I didn't drink wine. I didn't need courage anymore. I made tea. Real tea, the kind George liked. Loose leaves, a proper pot, steeped just right. I carried it to the living room and sat in the quiet, legs tucked beneath me, bergamot soft in the air. For the first time in a long while, I felt the beginning of peace. The call came the next afternoon. Grandma? It's Ethan. I closed the ledger in front of me. I'd been reviewing utility bills, preparing to shut off services at the lake cabin, the one Peter never used but always called an asset. It wasn't an asset anymore. Not to him. "Hello, darling," I said carefully. "Everything all right?" A pause. Then rushed and quiet. "I heard about Grandpa. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner." I waited, not to punish him, but because I needed to hear what came next. "I didn't know he'd passed until 2 days ago," Ethan said quickly. "Mom never told me. She said he was sick, but not that he was gone." I sat very still. "He passed almost 3 weeks ago." "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry." Silence settled between us. Not guilt. Grief. The kind you can't fake. "I wanted to come see you," he added. "If that's okay." I exhaled. "Of course it's okay." He arrived an hour later, taller than I remembered, slightly unshaven, smelling faintly of clean laundry and stress. He hugged me the way young people do when they're unsure if they're still welcome. One tentative arm, then all in when they realize you don't pull away. I didn't. We sat in the living room. I poured lemonade. He looked around like the house was both familiar and strange. That's what grief does. You recognize everything, but it belongs to a different world now. "I missed his funeral," he said. "I'll never forgive myself." "You weren't the one who chose to miss it," I said gently. He looked at me then, really looked. "Did Mom really not come?" I nodded once. "She told me they had work," he said quietly. "That it was handled." He ran his thumb along the frayed edge of the coaster beneath his glass. "I should have known better." After a moment he straightened. "I want to do something. For him. For you. Anything." "You already are," I said. "You're here." He didn't look convinced. I hesitated. Then stood and returned with a manila envelope. Inside were the trust papers, unsigned, unfiled, but real. I hadn't taken them to the bank yet. I wanted to see Ethan's face first. I handed him the folder. He opened it, his brows knitting as he read the first few lines. Then he looked up at me, alarmed. "Grandma, what is this?" "My plan," I said simply. He swallowed. "This is everything. The house. The cabin. Even the savings accounts." "Yes. But why me?" His voice cracked. "Why not Mom? Or Uncle Peter?" I could have said many things. I could have talked about their absence, their cruelty, their endless parties and excuses. But I chose a different truth. "Because you're the only one who came back without being called." He stared down at the papers, then set them on the table gently, as if afraid they might break. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just remember who you are. And remember what love looks like when it's real." His eyes were wet now. He wiped them with his sleeve, the way he used to when he was a boy and didn't want anyone to see him cry. We sat there for a long time without speaking, just being. The way George and I used to sit in the evenings, two people who didn't need to fill the air with sound to feel close. As he was leaving, Ethan turned back at the door. "If I come over next weekend, could we make pancakes again?" I smiled, full and soft for the first time in days. "We'll even use the good syrup." Celia showed up the next morning. I knew she would, not because she missed me, not because she needed comfort, but because I had stopped answering her messages. She arrived without warning, the tires of her black SUV crunching the gravel too fast, like she was late for something more important. She didn't knock. Just walked in, the way she always used to, as if the house still belonged to her in some invisible way. "Mom," she said, dropping her oversized handbag on the hall table. "I've been trying to reach you." I didn't get up. I was folding laundry slowly, deliberately, matching socks like it was the most important task in the world. "I've been busy," I said. She scoffed. "Busy with what?" I didn't answer. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water without asking, and leaned against the counter like she owned the walls. "So," she said. "Is it true?" I looked at her. "What are you referring to?" She tapped her nails against the glass. "Ethan says you're changing your will." I finished folding a shirt and placed it neatly in the basket. "I am. You and Peter are excluded." She laughed short, bitter. "Are you serious? After everything we've done for you?" I looked up then, folding finished, my hand still. "You didn't come to your father's funeral, Celia. You didn't send flowers. You didn't call. You didn't even ask." "I had an appointment." "Yes," I said, cutting her off. "Your nails. Then brunch." I saw the photos. She blinked but didn't deny it. You want to talk about what you've done for me? I continued. You sent me grocery lists, bills, school payments, mortgage requests, and I paid them quietly without asking for anything. That's what family does, she snapped. Helps each other. No, I said softly. That's what mothers do. And I did for years. She fell silent. Your father built this house with his bare hands, I said. He didn't have much, but he had pride. He taught you that respect is measured in actions, not words. And you couldn't give him 2 hours for a goodbye. That's not fair, she said weakly. She stared at the floor. So you're really cutting us out? Just like that? No, I said. Not just like that. I spent the last 20 years giving without receiving. I buried my husband alone. I sat beside his grave and waited for my children. They never came. That's not just like that. That's a lifetime. She folded her arms, trying to appear composed, but her mouth was tight. You're punishing us. No, Celia. I'm freeing myself. And I'm giving everything to Ethan. She laughed again, higher this time. He's a kid. What does he know about responsibility? He knows how to show up. The silence that followed was thick. I thought she might cry. I thought she might shout. Instead, she picked up her bag. Well, she said, adjusting her sunglasses. I hope this makes you feel powerful. No, I replied calmly. It makes me feel peaceful. She left without another word. I waited until I heard the car pull away before picking up the trust papers from the dining table and setting them beside the folded laundry. Later that evening, I found a letter on the doorstep. No stamp. No envelope. Just a creased, smudged sheet of paper. You don't understand what it's like to balance everything. We tried our best. Maybe we failed, but cutting us out like this isn't the answer. I read it twice, folded it in half, and placed it in the drawer marked miscellaneous, because that's what it was now. Just another piece of paper. Too little. Too late. Peter came the next day. He didn't barge in like Celia. He knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. I opened the door slowly, already knowing he wouldn't come alone. Behind him stood Meredith, his wife, wearing her usual stiff smile and a scarf too expensive for the weather. She nodded at me like I was a stranger she'd agreed to meet as a favor. Mom, Peter said, his voice calm, rehearsed. Can we come in? I stepped aside. He looked around the house like someone walking through a museum of a life he no longer recognized. I led them to the sitting room. They didn't take off their coats. I heard from Celia, he began. And from Ethan. I imagine you did. He cleared his throat. I think there's been some confusion. I said nothing. Meredith crossed her legs delicately, the diamonds on her finger catching the afternoon light. We understand this is a difficult time, May, she said. Emotions run high after a loss. I looked at her. You didn't come to his funeral either. She blinked. I had a client dinner. Very important. International. Peter shifted. Mom, listen. I should have called. I should have come. I just didn't know how. You thought, I interrupted gently, that if you ignored it long enough it would become someone else's grief. He looked away. I waited, I said. I sat in a room built by your father's hands while they lowered him into the ground. Alone. Peter opened his mouth, but Meredith placed a hand on his knee. A signal. Let her speak, she said. We understand you're upset, Meredith continued. And it's your right to change your will. But let's be reasonable. Ethan is 19. Yes. He's inexperienced. He doesn't know how to manage a trust or property. He could be manipulated. I raised an eyebrow. By whom? She didn't flinch. Peter tried again. Mom, I know I've disappointed you, but you have to admit this is extreme. No, I said softly. What's extreme is abandoning your father. What's extreme is living as if the people who raised you are disposable. He swallowed. So that's it, he said. You're cutting us off. You cut yourselves off. I'm just acknowledging it. Meredith stood. This could get complicated. Legally. I met her gaze. It won't. The paperwork is clean. My lawyer is good. And I've had time to think. Peter looked older than I remembered. Thinner at the temples, eyes hollow. I thought you forgave people. I do, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. They didn't argue after that. They stood, thanked me with forced politeness and left. Only after the door closed did I feel the tremor in my hands. Not fear. Not doubt. Release. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the last light bleed out of the sky. The roses were nearly bare now. Winter was close. George would have said, they'll bloom again. And they would. But not for everyone. Good, I said. Surprise is good. He smiled, uncertain, and led me to his office. Glass walls. A walnut desk. A single framed photo of his dog. George would have liked that. One honest face in a room full of finance. I understand you want to make some changes, he said, opening my account file. I already made them, I replied. I'm here to ensure they're carried through without delay. He scanned the notes, eyebrows lifting as he read. You've revoked all link transfers, removed Peter and Celia as beneficiaries, and set up an irrevocable trust in Ethan's name. That's a significant shift. I'm a significant woman, I said. He chuckled. Yes, you are. I leaned forward slightly. I want safeguards, Richard. Ironclad. No appeals. No family representatives twisting his arm 5 years from now, when they realize what they lost. We can structure the trust to prevent that. Disbursements would be controlled, education, housing, healthcare, until he's 30. After that, full access still protected. Would you like a co-trustee? No, I said. Ethan can have a financial advisor if he wants one. But the decisions are his. I trust him more than I trust lawyers. That wasn't a slight against Richard, just the truth. He adjusted his glasses. You understand this can't be undone easily. I don't want it undone. We went through everything. Signatures. Dates. Final confirmations. It felt like building something. Not a house, not a business, but something quieter. Stronger. A boundary that wouldn't bend with guilt or soften with time. Before I left, Richard folded his hands on the desk. May, if I may ask, and you can absolutely tell me it's none of my business, are you doing this out of anger? I considered the question. No, I said. I'm doing it out of clarity. He nodded slowly. That's rare. No, I said again, more gently this time. It's just late. When I stepped out into the afternoon light, it felt different, cleaner somehow. Lighter. Across the street was a coffee shop George and I used to visit after errands. I hadn't been there in years. It had changed, younger staff, louder music. But I walked in anyway and ordered a cappuccino. I sat near the window watching the street. A woman in her 30s passed by, pushing a stroller, her coat flapping open in the wind. She looked tired. Determined. Familiar. I sipped my coffee slowly. No phone in my hand. No urgency. Just a cup, a chair, and a full hour that belonged to no one but me. They always said this stage of life would be quiet. They didn't say how loud the peace could feel. Lorraine Campbell lived 2 houses down and had since 1972. We weren't the kind of women who called each other best friends, but we'd shared enough cups of tea, and enough knowing glances over our fences, that the silence between us had become a kind of language. She knocked around 5, carrying a tin of lemon shortbread and her usual gentle nosiness. I saw Peter's car here yesterday, she said as soon as I opened the door. Did he bring flowers or just excuses? Neither, I said, stepping aside to let her in. He brought his wife and a suit. Oh, she said, and that single word was drenched in judgment. We sat in the living room. I poured the tea, chamomile for her, strong black for me. She placed the tin between us on the coffee table and didn't open it. She waited. I told them, I said. Everything. That they're out of the will. That Ethan is the only one who ever came back without being asked. Lorraine let out a long breath. About damn time. I looked at her. I'm sorry, May, she said, softening. But I've watched you chase their approval for years. Babysitting when you had your own doctor's appointments. Writing checks while they took cruises. Smiling when they forgot birthdays. I kept thinking she'll snap one day. And thank God you finally did. I didn't snap, I said. I peeled back everything that wasn't love. Lorraine smiled. Better phrased. We sat in silence for a moment. listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional gust of wind outside. Fall was beginning to settle in, the kind that smells like old leaves and the edge of something ending. "Do you regret it?" she asked eventually. I shook my head. "I regret not doing it sooner." She opened the tin. The shortbread was perfect. Crisp edges dusted with sugar, buttery and soft in the middle. We each took one and chewed thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "my niece tried to get me to sell this house last spring. Said it was too much for me. That I should move to one of those senior villas near the lake." "Everything's done for you, Auntie," I said. "Laundry, meals, even group outings." She snorted. I told her I'd rather die in a house full of chipped mugs and my own silence than live somewhere that smells like bleach and other people's boredom. I laughed. A small real laugh that came from somewhere steady. Lorraine leaned in. "You and we come from a generation that knows what endurance costs. We wore our spines down raising people who think love is measured in gifts, and gratitude is optional." I nodded. "You're not cruel, May," she added. "They'll say you are. They'll whisper about how you cut off your own children. But they won't say you were the one who kept them afloat through every storm, even when they didn't bother to ask if you were drowning." I blinked hard but nothing fell. We talked for another hour about her garden, the neighborhood, the squirrels chewing on her gutter again. When she left, I hugged her longer than usual. That night I didn't turn on the television. I pulled out an old letter George had written during his first business trip, tucked into a drawer I hadn't opened in years. "May, this house is never empty with you in it. You are the roof, the floorboards, and the lock on the door. Even when it feels like no one sees you, I do." I read it 3 times before sliding it back into the envelope. The house was quiet but not empty. Not anymore. Started with a walk. A simple, unremarkable act. But for me it was the first one taken without a reason tied to someone else. Not to fetch prescriptions. Not to bring a casserole. Not to return a dish I hadn't asked to borrow. I just wanted to walk. The morning was brisk. Not cold, the kind of air that sharpens your lungs without biting your skin. I wore George's old windbreaker, a size too big, frayed at the cuffs, and felt oddly comforted by its weight. I walked the neighborhood slowly. Not like someone exercising, but like someone remembering what still belonged to her. The Mapleton still had blue shutters. The Wilsons' porch swing creaked the same way it always had. George used to say, "We should fix ours before that one finally falls." He never did. Neither did they. At the park, I sat on a bench beneath the old elm. The one that split in the storm back in '99. It still leaned slightly. Stubborn. Alive. Across the path, 2 young mothers pushed strollers, chatting about sleep training and preschools. They didn't look at me and I didn't mind. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I didn't want to be. A woman sat at the other end of the bench, maybe in her 40s. She had that tired but functioning look I remembered from my own middle years. The kind of woman who makes 5 lists a day and forgets why she walked into the room. We sat in silence. Then she said, without looking at me, "You come here often?" "Used to," I said. "Before people stopped needing rides and casseroles." She laughed softly. "That sounds nice." We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. "I'm here to clear my head," she said. "My daughter told me yesterday she doesn't think she wants kids. Says she doesn't see the point." I raised my eyebrows. "What did you say?" "I told her I didn't see the point of her 5 tattoos," she said. "But I managed to keep that to myself." I smiled. "You didn't keep it to yourself, though." She laughed again, freer this time. "No, I didn't." We talked for 15 minutes about nothing important, and everything that mattered. She left first, giving a small wave. I watched her disappear around the bend in the trail and felt something open in my chest. A small crack. Like the thawing of a long frozen door. That night I made dinner just for myself. Not quick food. Not leftovers. A full meal. I set the table, used the good dishes, lit a candle. I played the radio softly, the same station George liked, even if they talked more than they played music now. I ate in silence. Not lonely. Just alone. There's a difference. Afterward, I walked into the den and looked around. The room had always been George's: papers, books, half-finished crossword puzzles. I hadn't touched much since he passed. But tonight I did. I dusted, opened the windows, aired the house out. Then I sat at his desk and wrote a letter to myself, just a few lines. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are not required to earn peace through exhaustion. I folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer beside his last crossword. Half done. The answer to 14 down still blank. The clue was end of one chapter, start of another. I didn't need to know the answer. I was already living it. The envelope had his handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Slightly tilted, careful block letters with uneven spacing. Ethan had always pressed too hard with his pen, as if the words wouldn't count unless they left a dent. It arrived 3 days after our conversation, tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery flyer. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while the kettle boiled. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, the way I used to let my birthday card sit unopened on the mantel until after dinner, prolonging the mystery. When the tea was ready, I sat down and opened the envelope. Dear Grandma, I wanted to write this instead of texting. I know I could have just said it the last time I saw you, but I was still trying to find the right words. And now, after thinking about it for a few days, I don't think there are perfect words. So here are the honest ones. Thank you. Not just for the trust or the house or the cabin, though I know what a big thing that is, but for something else. For being the one person in this family who never asked me to be anything but exactly who I am. You've always made space for me. Even when my parents were pushing me to be more polished, more ambitious, more, I don't know, strategic. You were never strategic. You were just real. I didn't know Grandpa was sick. I didn't know he died. I still don't really know how to process that. And I'm sorry. I would have been there. You know I would have. And I'm so angry at Mom for not telling me. For assuming it didn't matter. I don't know what made you choose me, but I promise I won't waste it. I'm not going to let you down. I want to take care of this house, Grandma. I want to learn what you and Grandpa built. I want to understand the kind of strength it takes to keep showing up when no one else does. I love you. I don't say that enough, but I do. I always have. I read it 3 times. Once with dry eyes. Once with my hand pressed to my chest. Once with tears sliding silently down my jaw. Then I set the letter on the mantel and stood in front of it as if it were something sacred. Because in this house, letters like that were rare. Not because love didn't exist, but because it had gone too long unspoken, assumed, stretched thin. I didn't need the money I'd set aside. Not anymore. But I needed this. I needed to know that something I'd done, some small, quiet investment of time and tenderness, had not been swallowed whole by ungrateful children and performative holidays. That night I sat in George's chair and watched the shadows move across the floor as the sun dipped behind the maple trees. Ethan was the kind of man George would have respected. Not loud, not pushy, but steady, curious, present. That last one mattered more than anything now. Being present. Not just showing up but seeing. I knew Ethan wouldn't waste the trust. Not because of the money, but because he'd tasted what it meant to be forgotten. And people like that don't let things rot in silence. They plant something with it. They remember. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft creak of the house as the temperature dropped, wood shifting, settling, breathing. It was a sound I'd once found lonely. Now it sounded like life continuing, like legacy whispering back. Evenings had a new rhythm now. No phone calls from Celia asking if I could just stop by the school to pick up Ethan. Not because she needed me, but because her yoga class had overrun. No messages from Peter wondering if I'd mind covering a surprise car repair. Never urgent enough to justify panic, but always just enough to apply pressure. The silence had become gentle. That evening I set the table for one. Not because I was lonely, but because I finally understood the difference between eating and being fed. I made roast chicken. A real roast, not frozen, not microwaved. Potatoes too. I used rosemary from the garden George had planted back when we still believed weekends were for laughter instead of errands. I lit a candle. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. Halfway through dinner, the house grew so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I remembered that clock from the first apartment George and I ever rented. How loud it sounded when we lay awake at night with no money, no insurance, no real plan except each other. He always said, "We'll build something even if it's slow." It was slow, and it was beautiful. After dinner I washed the dishes slowly, no rushing, no multitasking, no wondering who might need the kitchen next. I dried them, put them away, and then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I danced. Not well. Not long. But enough. I turned on the record player. The old one George had tried to fix 100 times before giving up and telling me it had more charm with a scratch. He was right. It skipped every third line and I still knew the lyrics. I danced barefoot in the living room. Arms raised slightly, my body stiff in places I didn't remember ever being stiff. My knees reminded me I was 79. But my heart was 20 again. I danced like nobody was watching because for once nobody was. Not to judge. Not to expect. Not to wait until I stopped so they could hand me a bill or a need or a favor. Just me. In the house I kept. In the quiet I earned. I paused when I noticed the fireplace. Unused, cold, a layer of ash still clinging from the last winter George was alive. I knelt and cleaned it out carefully, sweeping the old away. Felt like a ritual. Like something sacred. That's when I found the note, tucked into a basket of kindling I hadn't touched in years. George's handwriting. Short. Simple. Keep dancing even if it's just in the kitchen. The world will try to make you forget who you are. Don't let it. I sat back on my heels, hands covered in dust, tears welling but not spilling. He had known. Maybe not exactly how things would unfold, but he'd known what life would try to do to me. How it would try to make me smaller, more polite, more accommodating. And he'd left this message like a trail marker in the woods. I sat there on the rug for a long while, watching the empty hearth. Not empty, I corrected myself. Waiting. Later that night, I opened my bedroom window just an inch and let the autumn air sweep in. The kind that smells like dying leaves and something cleaner underneath. I lay beneath the quilt I made back in '84, when George worked long hours, the kids were in school, and I still believed exhaustion was a virtue. Now I know better. Now I know peace is a better measure. My body was tired, but not in the old way, not the way it used to be when the weight of other people's needs settled into my spine like a second skeleton. This was good tired. Earned tired. The kind that comes after claiming something back. Not a throne, not revenge, just a name. Mine. I didn't expect her. When I opened the door and saw Meredith standing there. Alone, no car in sight. No Peter trailing behind with an apology rehearsed in a mirror. I felt a strange quiet fall over me. She was holding a pie. A store-bought pie. I raised an eyebrow. "It's apple," she said, offering a nervous smile. I stepped aside. Not out of kindness, not out of obligation. Just curiosity. She walked in like someone who had been here before but had never really looked. Her eyes grazed the hallway, the framed photographs, the coat rack George built in 1981. The same one Peter once broke a peg off as a child and lied about. George never fixed it. Said it was part of the story now. Meredith stood awkwardly in the kitchen. I didn't offer her tea. Didn't tell her to sit. I let the silence do its work. Finally, she said, "I didn't come to ask for anything." Good. I heard what happened. What you told Peter. About the trust. The house. Everything. I nodded. "I know you probably don't believe me," she continued, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "But I wanted to say thank you. That startled me." "For what exactly?" "For not giving it to Peter." She looked up then, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, I saw something genuine, unfiltered, uncalculated. "Peter never learned how to stand on his own," she said quietly. "He grew up with everything handled for him. I tried to keep up that illusion, but—" She stopped, eyes glassy now. "You enabling it didn't help. But neither did I. And now it's just who he is." I said nothing. She went on. "I know he blames you. And Celia blames you. But what they don't say is that you were the one holding the whole thing together while they complained about the way you did it." I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "So why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired too," she whispered. We stood in that still kitchen for a long moment. No one moved. The pie sat untouched between us. She finally sat down. "I want you to know I admired George," she said. "He was kind to me, even when he didn't have a reason to be. And I know I never said thank you for everything you did. The help. The money. The babysitting. The constancy." "Yes," I said. I watched her. "You didn't owe me thanks. But you owed him your presence when he left this world. And you didn't show." She looked down. "I know. There was no satisfaction in saying it. Just truth, like brushing dust off a windowsill. She reached into her purse, not to leave but to take something out. A small photograph worn at the edges. Ethan, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the swing in my backyard. I'd taken that photo on a Sunday. She must have pulled it from one of the Christmas cards I'd sent years ago. "He loves you," she said. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I hope someday he loves someone like that," she added. "And I hope he knows how rare it is." She stood then, straightened her coat. "I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted to say it before the story gets rewritten. Before they turn you into the villain in their version." She opened the door herself. The wind caught the edge of her scarf. For a second she looked younger, less lacquered. Just a woman who had also spent a lifetime giving herself away to people who never really saw it. She paused in the doorway. "Don't let them take your peace, May," she said. "They've taken enough." And then she was gone. I stood there a long time before I picked up the pie and placed it in the fridge. Not out of sentiment, just because it would be good with tea tomorrow. A week later I got a letter from the attorney. Not an emergency. Just a confirmation. The new documents were filed. The trust was active. Ethan's name now lived on every deed, every account, every line where Peter's and Celia's names used to be. It felt quiet. Not triumphant. Not dramatic. Just steady, like a book finally closed after sitting too long open. Its pages curled in the air. I took the envelope into the garden. The roses had finally given in to the cold. George used to say, "They surrendered with dignity." I'd always liked that phrase. Now I knew what he meant. There's a way to let go that doesn't look like defeat. I sat on the bench and ran my fingers over the paper. It was real now. All of it. Not just a decision made in grief or anger. It had settled into me, into the house, into the garden. I had done what needed to be done. And strangely I felt something else too. Not relief. Not pride. Permission. Permission to start again, even if it was only with small things. That afternoon I brought out the sewing machine. It had been packed away since before George got sick. I cleared the table, oiled the wheel, threaded the bobbin with the same quiet care my mother once taught me. I didn't need to make anything important. I just wanted to hear the hum again. That soft working rhythm that reminded me of women who kept going, no matter how much they carried. I made new curtains for the kitchen. They didn't match anything, bright blue with clumsy white stitching, but they were mine. The next morning I got up early and made pancakes. Real ones from scratch. Not from a box. I set 2 plates on the table. I knew Ethan would come. He always came when he said he would. He arrived just after 9, carrying a bag of groceries I hadn't asked for. "Thought you might want something fresh," he said. I smiled. "You want to learn how to make them today?" "Yeah," he said. "I do." We cooked together. I showed him how to flip without tearing, how to test the pan's heat with a drop of water, how to fold the batter without losing the air. He listened. Really listened. Not the way Peter used to. Impatient. Always looking for the shortcut. "You're good at this," he said, biting into the first one. "I've had time to practice," I said. He poured on more syrup and grinned. "You know, I think this place could be something." I looked at him. "The house," he said. "I don't just mean keeping it. I mean using it. Maybe for others. A space for people who don't have a place to go. Or a little garden workshop. Teaching people things." Something opened inside me that I hadn't expected. Hope, not the loud, desperate kind. The soft, patient kind. "I think your grandfather would like that," I said. He nodded. "Maybe I'll start with the porch. Needs fixing." "You'll need real tools," I said. "Not those college boy ones in plastic kits." He laughed. "Guess you'll have to teach me that too." We ate the rest in easy silence. After he left, I stood at the sink washing dishes, the window open, the new curtains swaying gently. The wind smelled of dry leaves and something faintly sweet. Maybe cinnamon, maybe memory. I looked out at the yard. The roses were gone for the season. The bench was cold. The trees stood bare but upright. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt no weight pressing down on me. Just the shape of what came next. Something Ethan would build. Something I had cleared the space for. The first snow fell lightly. A whisper of white dust across the yard. The kind that doesn't stick yet but tells you the season has truly changed. I watched it from the back porch, wrapped in my thick cardigan, coffee in hand. Ethan was out front, measuring the steps with a small level, mumbling to himself the way George used to when he worked. It had been a month since I signed the papers. The world hadn't applauded. The sky hadn't opened. But something in me had shifted. A weight carried for decades was finally gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It wasn't victory. It was space. The kids hadn't called again. Celia sent one text. I hope you're proud of what you've done. I didn't respond. Peter's silence was longer, deeper. A void that no longer asked to be filled. I didn't chase them. I let them tell their version. Let them paint me cold. I'd lived long enough to know that people will always rewrite the truth to make their shame more comfortable. But I knew what happened. I knew what I gave. And I knew what I reclaimed. The truth didn't need to shout. It just needed to stand. Ethan knocked gently on the back door. Grandma, you want to see the new railing? I set down my mug and followed him out front. He'd done well, sanded, stained, sealed it against the weather. The porch, for the first time in years, looked like someone cared about it again. George would have said it leaned a little to the left. I smiled. Ethan grinned. So does everyone in this family. I laughed real loud, real open. A laugh that hadn't lived in me for a long time. He stood beside me, wiping his hands on a rag. I was thinking maybe next spring we could start a little garden out front. Not just flowers. Vegetables. Herbs. Something that grows. I looked at him and saw not just the boy I used to tuck in, but the man who had chosen to show up. That sounds just right. We went inside. The cold was starting to bite now. I made soup. He fixed the squeaky cabinet. I showed him where the breaker box was. He asked about the attic insulation. We filled the day with the small necessary things that make a life. Not the kind you take pictures of, but the kind you miss when they're gone. That night, after he left, I wrote one more letter. Not for court. Not for lawyers. For myself. To the woman I used to be. You tried longer than you should have. You bent yourself into shapes that didn't fit. You spoke gently when you should have stood tall. You gave when you should have said no. But you also loved fiercely. And that is not a mistake. Now you are free. Free to dance in kitchens. To plant something just for the pleasure of watching it grow. To say no without guilt. To say yes without fear. To give when it is deserved, not demanded. You are not cruel. You are not bitter. You are clear. And that finally is enough. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I'd once kept the old family photos. Not to hide it. Just to know it was there. Like a lighthouse I had built myself. Before bed, I stepped outside one last time. The stars were sharp. The cold deeper now. I looked up at the sky and whispered. He would have been proud. Not of the decision. Not even of the strength. But of the fact that I had finally chosen peace. Not loud. Not showy. Just mine. So here's what I'll leave you with. You who have read this far, who may have your own silences, your own aching rooms, your own unspoken boundaries. Do not wait for someone to hand you peace. Choose it. Do not confuse love with obligation. Do not confuse duty with worth. And if your house is full of noise but no one hears you, make a new kind of quiet. One where you are no longer invisible. One where you do not have to disappear to feel safe. If this story found something true in you, share it. Tell someone. Or just hold it close and sit with it a while. I promise that's enough.